Hello, it's Kira with Create Along and Polymer Clay TV, and let's make a little fairy mushroom. All right, today we're focused on making a little fairy scene with this wooden mushroom. So I've already covered this one with clay, and I did that on an Instagram Live and in the Clay and Play Tribe Facebook group. So if you want to see how I did that one, come on over. So this is the basic supplies we're going to need. We're going to need some kind of a white glue. So I'm using Crafter's Pick the Ultimate, but you can use Elmer's if that's what you have. You can use Sobo, you can use Weld Bond. You need white glue. I'm going to use alcohol ink. I've picked a color that I like, and this is a pouncer. You'll see me use that. I've got Sculpey Premo and Sculpey 3 and Souffle. Usually I don't use Sculpey 3. But for this project, because it's a sculpture, I'm okay with it. The reason I say that is I don't use this for jewelry making because of how it feels after you bake it. It's more of like a sculpture clay, not something that you're going to handle all the time because it doesn't have the strength, okay? I have a stamp to make the little mushy bottom. I have some rhinestones and my crystal catcher to work with them, and that also happens to have a little ball tip end which I'm going to use for my sculpting. And these come with the mushrooms. This is a set of little ceramic cabochons with a hot fix glue on the back. Step one for this project is going to be covering the area of your wooden piece with glue and letting it dry. So we need to do this in advance. I've already done half of the mushroom, so I only have to wait for the other half to dry. And this is pretty easy. I just use my finger and swipe on a thin amount of glue. This does need to be thoroughly dry before you start using the clay. Okay, so very thin. It really, I can't stress enough, don't leave big globs, just do a thin layer. And because I'm going to give this mushy a frilled bottom, I'm going to cover this part as well. But not the stem, because I'm doing something different with the stem. Whatever parts of your wood you're going to cover with clay, get some glue on it. Now, I'm not going to be precious here about getting all the way to the stem. This is really just to give my clay underneath something to stick to. So now just going to wash off my fingers and let that dry. While that dries, we're going to condition a chunk of each of these clay colors. Now, I will say that the souffle is a lot harder than the Sculpey 3, and that's going to matter in this project because we're going to make a little sort of cane. So you want to get this really moving, and you may even want to mix a little bit of something softer into this so that it will be as soft as the other color, or alternatively, you can mix something harder in with the Sculpey 3. So I think that that's what I'm gonna do. So I have this color that's got a little harder consistency. This is a Premo blush, I believe, and I'm gonna take away a little of this. I don't want to over make because I don't need a lot. And I'm going to blend these two colors together to make a slightly stiffer clay. I've got this color, which I actually might decide to blend this into that to make it a little bit softer, so somehow we'll meet in the middle. When you're caning, you always want your clay to be of a similar consistency, or else when you blend them together and try to reduce them and cut them, you end up with a cane that won't reduce at the same rate because you got two different consistencies of clay inside. So we're gonna condition these together, and we're gonna get the color for the bottom of the mushy. So I have this color that's been lying around. This is similar to like a, I don't know, it's a scrap. It's a scrap of various browns and white, okay? Okay, all our clay is conditioned and rolled out to about a number 2 or 3 on my pasta machine. And I'm just going to stack them together like this, and we're gonna make a simple jelly roll cane, which starts as layers that you just roll up, like a cinnamon roll or a jelly roll cake. That's where it gets its name. Right, so once we have that, now I'm gonna stretch this out because I want the jelly rolls to be pretty tiny. You can roll this type of cane to make it longer and smaller. I usually don't recommend rolling a cane because it can make the inside twist, which messes up the pattern, but on a jelly roll, you just got a very simple pattern, so it's okay. All right, now we're gonna let that rest. Next, we're gonna make the bottom, and I'm going to get started by using my Radiations stamp, and that gives us a pattern to work with. So I'm just gonna give this a little roll, get the pattern started, and then I can't find my yucky blade. I don't want to scrape this too much. All right, so then what we're gonna do is we are going to take a little circle cutter and cut out a circle to fit around that. Circles are a basic shape you should have. I've got some plunger cutters here, and this is about the same size circle. So I'm just gonna remove the center here. And then I'm going to make a slit here so that I can grab this and lay this around like so. It's perfect. And then we're gonna join the seam. And don't worry if it's not perfect or if you're touching it a lot, because we're gonna use the back of our blade to fix these frilly things in a minute. So I'm just kind of pressing to see where the edge of that circle is before I run my blade along the edge of the mushroom to cut off the extra clay. As always, when using a blade, be careful and don't cut yourself. Make sure your fingers aren't in the way. This takes practice. If it takes you a minute, don't worry. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And always remember that practice makes perfect. Okay, so now that this is on here, we're just gonna flip our blade around to the non-sharp side. And if there's any areas where you don't like how this looks or you wish it was more frilly, you can make more marks on here. And I think I'm just gonna do it towards the outer edge because I like how it looks. But I could see where on the outs, oops, I'm being too vigilant. So then when that happens, of course, you can come back and fix it. I like how it looks on the interior. I think I just care to see more of that frilliness on the exterior side of things. Right, so now I've got my mushroom bottom. You'll see what all these little scrappy things are for in a couple minutes. Now, let's make our little mushroom top. So I'm going to take slices of this, and it's not gonna have a very, like, I didn't put a lot of contrast in here for a reason, because I don't want it to be a really in-your-face swirl design. I just kind of want it to be there, but not be a spiral. So I'm just gonna cut this up. And now that I have a bunch of slices, I'm just gonna start at the top, press it on, and cover the whole top of my mushroom with these slices. I'm not going to worry right now that I'm seeing all these seams, because I'm going to come back with my finger like this once it's all covered and just meld those seams together. It's pretty easy when you've got a nice soft conditioned clay to just mush it with your fingers. You'll notice as you try this project that having coated the wood with the glue first really gives you a nice advantage, because the clay is not going to want to pop off. And as I lay these slices on here, I'm pushing pretty hard because I also want to spread them out a little bit, because this layer of clay really doesn't need to be thick because it is on a solid wood base. So I like to kind of rock my finger or thumb, whichever way you do it, back and forth, and that pushes the clay on, melds the seams, and spreads out the pieces of clay that I'm putting on here so that they're not really thick. Now, this would be a great time to take out a tool like your Lucy clay slicer or a click-a-slice, something that cuts canes. If you wanted to make them very thin so that you didn't have to do a lot of spreading out of the cane slices, you could. However, if you make them thin, it'll be harder to blend the seams because you won't have as much clay. So whichever way you want to do it, that's up to you. I like having a bit of extra. This thickness here gives me the extra I need to be able to blend the edges together fairly easily. I'm going to have to cut some more slices in a second. Now, when you come to the edges, you have a decision to make. Do you want it to come down and overlap the edge, come directly to the edge? Are you going to come back and cut this and make it perfect to the edge? That is all up to you. I am going to let my slices overlap the edge. Now, the other way that you could do this is you could make a sheet of the caned slices and turn it into a piece that you could just drape over the top of the mushroom. And if you decide to do that, this is how I finished this one. I rolled it and left a ragged edge. I liked how that looked. Now I'm getting to the point here where I don't have enough room for a full slice, and I don't need a full slice. So to make this easier on myself, I'm going to split this cane. Rather than cutting all of my individual pieces in half, so that I can get some half slices to put around the edge. And this is where I have an advantage, because I didn't make such a strong, contrasting, graphic jelly roll that I couldn't, like if I had done that, if there were strong lines of color in here, I wouldn't be able to use a half slice randomly, because you would be able to see that and it would look weird. So there's a method to my madness. Usually I would tell someone not to make a cane that had colors that are so close together, because then you can't see the pattern. But in this case, you can see a gentle pattern here. It's not a screaming at you graphic line pattern, and I didn't want it to be. All right, so anywhere where you feel like you might need a slice, you can come and finish off your edge. And now I'm just going to take a few minutes to blend any seams that I see and make sure that I'm very happy with this, because as we know, what you put in the oven is what you get back out of the oven. So if there are scratches, fingerprints, seams, dings, and other things that you don't like, now is the time to smooth it out, because if you bake it like that, the only way to get it out is to sand, and I avoid sanding like the plague because I don't like to do it. So I'd prefer to take the time before I bake to make sure everything is perfect. And usually you can just smooth something with your fingers, your thumb, and it'll be nice, okay? So we're good here, and it's time to build a little fairy house on top of our mushroom. That's what all these little scraps of clay are for. So this is the Sculpey granite color, one of my favorites. I feel like it's a very versatile color for making earrings that are like a modern basic kind of a color, and then of course for fantasy sculpting. So I'm gonna go very basic and tiny with this. I don't want to be crazy with this. So what tools do I have to help me? I have this. Let's see if I can do everything with the ball stylus on the end of this tool. That way I don't have to recommend so many tools to you. So I'm gonna make a little, I'm gonna draw out, let's see if we can get a little closer. I'm gonna draw a little front door, and I'm gonna use a little piece of clay for it. And it's gonna have a window, and then maybe another window right next to it. So let's make the door first. This is tiny crafting. So a little kind of oblong door, and I might even need my glasses, which are on top of my head, so I can see what the heck I'm doing. All right, so we're just gonna flatten it out. This might even be too big, but that's okay. I will wrap it around the bottom if I have to. Put it here. And use the back of my blade again to give it some texture, and also push it onto the base. And then we'll get a little tiny piece of blue. And just make a little indication of a window. And then I want to do the same thing. I want to make like a little window on the side here. So I'll use this as a little mini roller. And now this time, hang on, I don't usually craft in miniature like this. So just be a little gentle. And I want it to look like a window. So I'm going to cut it into a square. Or a rectangle. And get a little tiny piece of blue. It's kind of fun. To just put in the middle of this. It's too big, isn't that funny? It's too big needs to be even smaller. And then, if you can believe it, I'm gonna put a little, tiniest little X across it to make it look even more like a window. So the amounts of clay you need are so little. Let's see if I can put this across here. And that across this way. Look, still too much clay. Tiny, tiny amounts. There we go. A tiny little fairy window. Right here. And I want to give it a roof. So the roof is going to be this. Ooh, look, that'll be perfect. This came from a silk screen that I did earlier today. It's a scrap. Scraps come to so much good use. Okay, so I want to make one of those fun. I want it to echo the top of this because they're going to be next to each other. So we will give it a sort of flat area here and then make it come up like a little teardrop and bend it over. Okay, so I'm gonna put this here on top of the mushroom like that. Don't worry, we're not done. I'm gonna open this up because I want to give it a different shape. So I'm gonna use my tool to kind of flare it out. And pinch it a little on the edges so it's not so thick. Like that. Set it up here so it's very jaunty. And now we're gonna do some bushes and stuff around the base. So for that, we'll use clay. Maybe we'll even, oh, I'm getting little ideas as I go here. So I think I'm gonna do stepping stones too. So I'll make a little log of my granite. And just take off little slices. You decide how many you want and where you want them to go. And for moss, I want to do a little ring around the base of the house because I think it's going to help it to stick on there. So we'll make a little log. and kind of wrap it starting near the front door and come around the side, around the back. I don't want it to come too close to the front of the door to cover it. So we'll do this, and then moss is easy. And that you get another chance here to kind of stick the door to the top of the house by pressing some of this against the side of the house. Isn't that cute? And then you get to, whoops, try not to knock it over. And you get to play and add accessories. And let's see, I might make a little bush, and you can mix colors of green to make it more realistic. So to make a little bush, I'll take a piece of this green that I already used and a bunch of other little pieces of another color. Flip this over, put those other colors on the outside so that we have like a little ball of clay that's 2 colors of green now. And decide where you want it to go. I'm thinking over here by the side of the house. And you can use your tool to shape it. And if you want to put a little moss between the stepping stones, of course, you can do that. You can also use your ball tool to scoop off little pieces of clay to put around. And sometimes when you do that, let me see if we can zoom in. When you do that, it makes like pretty realistic little pieces because you're not being super careful and you've got little frayed edges and clumps. And you don't have to work very hard to make them. And then at the end, you get to decide how much, how much decoration do you want to do? Do you want to add flowers? I was thinking I might add some little yellow pieces to be flowers. And we're talking about the tiniest little pieces of clay. That I just scoop off with the end of the tool. So I'm just going to pretend that they're flowers because trying to make flowers that small would drive me a little nuts. But putting in that little piece of yellow is kind of fun. And then last but not least, I had pulled out my crystals because I know there are some really tiny ones in here. And these tiny little ones make good flowers as well, especially for a fairy door. It's just a little sparkle here and there with the tiniest little crystals that I could find. And they do have a hot fix glue on the back. Everything that I'm using here, except for the polymer clay, which I do not sell, and that all comes from Sculpey, right? But everything else you can find in the shop at createalong.com. All right, so that's enough of the little crystals. And then I just wanted to show you how you could dye the bottom, because it's raw wood, with some alcohol ink. So we'll do that and then we'll be finished. So this is a ink pouncer. This comes from Ranger. So does the ink. I like to use the Ranger Adirondack inks. This is pink sherbet. And what we do here is we put a little ink on the pouncer. It's made of felt, and we swipe that ink onto the wood to dye it. Kind of like a wood stain. And a little ink goes a long way. And I'm doing this now before baking, and I may come back after baking to add a little bit more. We'll see how it turns out. I also might want to use a paintbrush or something to get up in here closer, and maybe not. We'll see. Let's bake this and decide. We are out of the oven with possibly the cutest thing I've ever made. So here we go. On this little guy, who's now all baked and set in place, you can see the subtle color of those swirls. Okay, now I know that I talked about these, but I didn't use them on this mushroom. I used them on this one. So how these work is the same way as the rhinestones. This is a little ceramic cabochon, and on the back there's a heat set glue. So when you stick it onto your clay, it's going to bake in place, and now these are on here. They're not going anywhere because they're glued on. So the baking process glues them on. And the last final thing that I hadn't done yet is decide how I want to finish off the stem of this mushroom, because I have, started with this alcohol ink, and I could finish with that color, or I also have the pearl alcohol inks, and I love these so much. So I'm gonna use this, and I'm gonna, like, I don't know, ombre them together a little bit. And I'm just gonna use a brush and pick it up and come in here and swipe this on. Now this stuff dries really fast, so you've just gotta move quickly. The reason I'm putting it on a tile is because that's non-porous, and then I can control it with my brush rather than putting it directly on the wood. What happens when you put it directly on the wood is it soaks into the wood almost immediately, and then you can't really move it around very much. Okay, so, and then it just kind of creates a defined little splotch of stain on the wood instead of allowing you to blend it and move it around. And since it's got a little sparkle and it's slightly different from that other color, I'm gonna just do a little swiping it around the whole area here until I feel good about it, and call it done. And then this can just be rinsed off with isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol. All right, so there's two different kinds of Adirondack inks. There's the regular kind, which I think this might be newer or older labeling. I don't like this label, but it's not pretty. It's not cool looking. It's just very informational. And this color is Pink Sherbet. And then this color is called Enchanted. And they have mica particles in the bottom, so you got to shake them up good. But there you go. There's a little fairy house on top of a mushroom. You can get these mushrooms in the shop at createalong.com. All the tools and supplies shown except for the polymer clay, which was Sculpey 3, Sculpey Souffle, and I also really love to use Premo, Sculpey Premo. You can get those from sculpey.com. Come on back next time and watch some Polymer Clay TV.